Hello and welcome to a City Voices interview with Liz Evans. Liz is a Canadian nurse and leading harm reduction advocate. She founded the Portland Hotel Society in 1993 to provide stable housing for people in Vancouver's downtown Eastside who faced addiction, untreated mental illness, and repeated eviction, an approach that helped define the housing first model. In 2003, she and her husband, Mark Townsend, co-established Insite, INSITE, North America's first sanctioned supervised injection facility, created amid a deadly overdose crisis and made possible through persistent advocacy for a federal legal exemption, all in Canada. When a later government sought to close the site, Evans and Townsend mounted a constitutional challenge that led to a unanimous 2011 Supreme Court ruling protecting Insite as an essential health service in Canada. Though they left the organization in 2014, Evans' work continues to shape harm reduction and housing policy across the continent. So we have a maverick with us today. How are you, Liz?
Very well. Thanks for having me, Dan.
So, Liz, what drew you to the streets of Hastings, that some call the most drug-riddled, woeful place in Canada?
Yeah, well, I was working as a nurse in the emergency department of a hospital in Vancouver. I guess it started really before that for me. When I was working, when I was in nursing school, yeah, I used to volunteer at a couple of homeless women's shelters that were near the university when I was in nursing school. And during that time, I got to know a lot of the women who were on the street, who were outside in the cold. Ottawa gets very cold, and was really drawn to them as people. I really liked them. I got to know them well. One of the shelters was an overnight shelter where women slept. The other was a daytime soup kitchen where people ate. So I'd just make food and hang out with the women there. And honestly, for complicated reasons, some of them reminded me a lot of my mom. And I got to really connect with this idea of invisibility and how so many people just don't seem to exist on people's radars. And then after I graduated from nursing, I realized that many of the women that I had gotten to know were officially diagnosed with chronic mental health diagnoses. So I decided to go and work in psychiatry because that seemed to be the field that was drawing me based on the people that I most wanted to work with at that time. So I worked in a psychiatric hospital in Canada and then moved with my best friend and roommate at the time out to BC, out to British Columbia, where I ended up in the emergency department of a pretty large inner city hospital. And that was where I sort of had my moment of reckoning, I guess, when I saw all these people coming through the emergency, these rotating door folks that were living on the street, people that were living in poverty, people that didn't have any social supports. And at that point, I had been kind of frustrated by the limitations of the role working contained within a system that didn't see the larger picture of people's lives as part of the problem. It saw the diagnosis of mental illness as the main reason people were coming in to be treated, many people who also struggled with substance use. And the theory was if we medicated appropriately, people would go on to stabilize in their lives. But the revolving door obviously indicated there were so many other things that people needed to support them in their life. So I left and started working at a tenants' rights housing activist organization in a very low income neighborhood called the Downtown Eastside. They had just taken on the management of a single room occupancy hotel that had 70 rooms. And they didn't really know what they wanted to do with it, but they had decided that they needed to address deinstitutionalization in the community. And so they had raised a small amount of money to pay somebody to work part-time with 10 adults living with mental illness in the context of this SRO hotel. So they hired me for that. And that's how I ended up there. It was a very long explanation.
That's a lot of information that is not on Wikipedia. So this is beautiful.
There you go.
How did Hastings come to be this way historically?
Oh, well, that's a more complicated question. Interestingly, the neighborhood of the downtown east side and Hastings Street is sort of the main business street that goes right through the middle of it, was the sort of downtown core of Vancouver. It was the business district. And then as retail patterns shifted over time, the epicenter economically moved to a different location. So at the turn of the century, there were a lot of hotels there. And Vancouver has a history of being a logging town. So all the loggers, all the folks that worked on the ships, they were out and they'd come in when they'd have their holidays or their weekends, and they'd come into the city and basically rent a hotel room and go drink in the bars. So all of the hotels had these bars on the main floor, and the SRO hotel rooms were really kind of these destination hotels. Over time, what happened is that housing stock, these SRO hotel rooms, and when I started in 1991 in the community, we had in excess of like 14,000 of these hotel rooms available for people living on welfare to rent and live in as low-cost housing. But over time, they became increasingly gentrified. The buildings got bought and sold. The rooms got developed. The housing stock got lost. So down to about 4,000. So we lost about 10,000 of these units in just sort of the first 6, 7, 8 years of me working in the downtown east side. So I watched the impact that had in compressing people into smaller and smaller space, less real estate, less affordable housing, more people on the street. Yeah, it's all an economic crisis, really.
Uh, this is the book I was referring to. It's called A
Ah,
Kid's Book About Addiction. Is it like all reversed on your end? Or
no,
is
I can
it?
see it.
Oh, okay, good. So I see it as reversed. Um, and I'd like to read from it and
Okay,
take your thought, get your thoughts on it.
sure.
Okay. So they ask in the book, what is addiction? Big bold letters. What is it? And they say in on a page that's totally colored red with white letters, an addiction is when someone wants or needs something so badly that they will do anything to get it. Do you
Hmm.
feel that's a fair definition?
Wants or needs something?
Wants or needs something so badly that they will do anything to get it.
Hmm. Well, I think it's more accurate to say that um, addiction, well, it's such a complicated question. Addiction develops because of a need, typically. So less of a want, more of a need. Sometimes it starts out with a want for escape or a want for pleasure in some instances, but less problematic use is from wanting. More problematic use comes from needing. So saturating unmet loneliness and psychic pain, drugs are great at that. They help relieve suffering. So there's a lot of people who use substances because they are coping with enormous psychological pain and suffering. And so what happens eventually is that it becomes difficult for people to know how to live without those um, medication, those drugs, because um, in spite of the potentially negative consequences that they can cause, the need for them is greater. And I know here in the US, there's a very strong tendency to put the narrative of addiction squarely in this biomedical model of a brain disease, which, obviously is kinder and more gentle than calling it a criminal behavior, which it was for a long, long time, and it still is ultimately, sadly, in many places. But it's kinder to say it's a medical disease and that it's a disease of the brain. Um, but I think that that's really a simplistic way of thinking about addiction. I think it's true that there are physical effects on the brain of using. I like to think of them more as more akin to kind of a habit, like a habituated response, like our neural networks get used to this one groove that gets created from this repeated behavior. So we develop this very strong habit that's hard to stop. Um, but it can stop, and people can change their habit. They can stop using in a problematic way, but not until we figure out why they're using and meet the need that that drug is fulfilling for them with something else. So something else has to matter more. Life has to be better without them, um, or it's
Further
very
along in
harmful.
the book, it asks, but how does a person become an addict? And the answer is, from the book, first of all, they don't choose to be one. It's something that has always been inside them, but one day, without them knowing it, it accidentally gets triggered.
Yeah, that's terrifying. I mean, if I was a child reading that, I'd be quite terrified that there was this monster inside of me that could pop out at any moment unsolicited. I mean, obviously, genetics is a factor. It's one of many. But I think, the whole epigenetics research is really interesting because it talks about these switches that come on and off and, the environmental cues that relate to those. And I think it's much more accurate to say that those switches powerfully can be turned on or off based on our environment, based on our relationships, based on all sorts of things. Trauma being a huge one.
All right, so already I have a sense that you would change some of this wording, right?
Yeah, I'd write a different book, I think.
Okay, how about this? This is much farther along.
Okay.
Um, You didn't cause the person to be an addict. It isn't your fault. Even if you had a temper tantrum, even if you called them names, even if you weren't very nice, these things don't cause addiction.
Who is the you they're talking to? The parents
The
or like
child, I
the
think. They're talking to
child?
the child.
Oh, I see. Because they're sort of trying to say to kids, if your family member has addiction, don't blame yourself. Well, I
Possibly,
mean,
yes. Yes.
yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, that's a good message because children shouldn't internalize blame at any point or take responsibility for things their parents are doing that could be hurtful or could leave them feeling abandoned or alone. It's always a good message to say it's not your responsibility so it doesn't cause more pain. And we know that children who have addiction in the family do struggle and can suffer, but there does need to be a conversation about, you know, um, what needs to happen to support individuals who are struggling with drug use to be able to be in their children's lives, to support them in a way that provides them with what they need in order to parent in a way that doesn't always say the only outcome here is that your children are taken away, which is sort of the historical narrative around anybody who uses.
And the last thing from this book, uh, maybe, I mean, you might want to write them a letter or something. I don't know. This is about relapse.
Mm.
Um, and relapse does imply like a medical relapse, right?
Mhm.
Um, but it says, but while you can't fix someone's addiction, you can support them in their recovery. You can tell them that you love them, write them letters, draw pictures for them, go on walks with them, or give them hugs.
Nothing wrong with that.
All right, very
The
good.
one thing I would say, and it was funny, I'm at a conference now where I was talking on a panel this morning about stigma and the intersection of sex work and human trafficking and substance use. And one of the things that I really feel strongly about is that there's many narratives around addiction that only exist to say we should be kind when people stop using and that the person's life has value when they recover. And I think a big piece missing from that conversation is that we should just be telling people that their lives matter, period, whether they're using or not. And I think that the recovery language can sometimes be a bit judgmental in the sense that it's sort of like, unless you're in recovery, you're not on the path to righteousness. And therefore, almost like a sort of a sinner sin thing, which I find very sad and very painful because it provides permission to people to mistreat people who are struggling.
Can you describe like a day in the life of an addict?
Not really. I mean, it's different for everybody. Everybody has a different relationship to the substances they use. And obviously, there's all degrees of use, different kinds of drugs people use. But I think for the most part, I mean, the folks that I got to know in the downtown east side who were struggling with often multiple substances, opiates, stimulants, alcohol, pills, whatever they could get their hands on, who were really severe chronic users who had been extremely traumatized and had lived in extreme desperate poverty for a long time. Um, it was pretty dull. They had to resort to selling their bodies. Mostly they're on this terrible hamster wheel of just trying to get the substances into their body so that they don't go into withdrawal and feel incredibly sick. So it's dull in the sense that it's a routine that you're trapped by. You can't really just decide one day to stop. And so that's why we were very um, aggressive in terms of advocating to get methadone available for folks. And we introduced like the first low barrier methadone program actually in Canada into our building back in the 90s because prior to that it had been really hard in Canada for people to get it, especially in our community. They had to jump through a lot of hoops. They had to get on a bus, go out of town, do urine tests every day, pay money. And so our program, which the College of Physicians supported, allowed us to provide the medication to people right in our hotel. People could come and collect it, and it was very flexible. They could come anytime during the day. And in Canada now, methadone is pretty available in regular pharmacies. Doctors prescribe it. It's not like here where there's this DEA infrastructure where there's methadone clinics that you have to go to in dedicated locations. And so as a result, I think it's more widely accessible in Canada. And also it's in the public health system. So again, having these medications that treat opiate use or or stimulant use or depression or alcohol use embedded in our public health system in Canada brings a very different kind of priority set to how we approach the user. So here it's like there's two options: you're in recovery or you're not. And the methadone space is trying to fill that gap here, but it's very tightly regulated and very tightly controlled, and it's still very impregnated with the recovery language. And we know a lot of people that are taking these medications are also using on top, so it's not simple.
So, in the life of someone with an addiction, they're trying to avoid at all costs withdrawal, which is they call that dope sickness, right? Dope sick. You don't want to be dope sick, right?
Well,
So,
if your addiction is opiates, then you couldn't go through extremely painful withdrawal symptoms. And now there's all these cuts in the drugs that are, well, there always has been, but one of the cuts that's in the drug supply right now is something called medetomidine, and that's a heavy duty tranquilizer like xylazine. And one of its key features is just how ill people get when they withdraw. I mean, it's bad enough just withdrawing from fentanyl without medetomidine in, but now it's horrific. I mean, people are going through severe cramps, like hallucinations, seizures. Yeah, withdrawing from opiates typically is an extremely painful process. That's why we say people should go on methadone or other medication assisted treatment because that actually addresses the need. And so people can go on to build their life and address the cravings, not have withdrawal, and be stable. And then they can sort of move forward in their life trying to figure out what they need to be safe and to find stability, community, connections, all the things that help people recover.
oh,
I'm going all around the houses, Dan. Sorry.
that's all right.
A day in the life of an addict, you said.
Yeah. So so okay, methadone and whatever else
Buprenorphine.
is available to help curb the addictions and help people expand their horizons a little bit beyond the cycle of addiction and getting cash at whatever cost and buying more drugs and using more drugs and avoiding withdrawal and all that type of thing. Um, so how did your organization help the folks at Hastings who are in these cycles?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is the nature of addiction is that it is they say in medical language, chronic and relapsing. So it lasts for many years. The average length of time somebody who has an injection drug use habit or addiction is that they stay in their addiction is between 22 and 26 years. So we're not talking about a quick turnaround time. People will tell you, oh, we just need more treatment beds. We need people to go to treatment. Well, that was what I thought when I started in this field. And I thought, yeah, I just need to get everybody into treatment and detox. And then that's how I'm going to help. And then I had to learn pretty fast um, from the people that I was trying to get into treatment that there was a no magic answer. And B, a lot of people just didn't want that. And I would try and try and try, and they didn't want to go. They weren't ready, or they'd been through a million times. It hadn't worked for them. It wasn't what they wanted. So instead, what we had to do was sort of reshape, redefine, re-understand what helping looked like, which in the early 90s was highly controversial because this concept of reducing harm without demanding abstinence was definitely not something that was discussed or tolerated in most of our communities. And so I think I was struck by the enormous degree of suffering that people were going through, and the tolerance for that suffering because people were using drugs. There was this intrinsic sense of, well, it's their fault. They're a junkie, so if they die, they asked for it. So helping to start out with just looked like giving people space where they weren't going to be brutalized. So that's where we started. Very simple goal, like give people housing that they're not going to be kicked out of, and figure out what they do need that is going to be helpful. And in the process of doing that, we brought in simple things to start with, like clean syringes instead of dirty ones. At that time, people had a 1 in 4 chance of getting HIV if they were an injection drug user. That was the rate of conversion to HIV. So incredibly high, super risky. And that was because there weren't clean syringes around. You could buy one on the street for $5. That's how short in supply they were. So we got involved in just providing people with clean syringes and picking up dirty ones and that kind of thing. Basic.
Yeah, basic housing first is what they started calling it. You started that with your program, and and harm reduction, clean syringe program. Uh, totally novel at the time.
Yeah.
Um, did you grow to love some of the folks there?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Many of them. Hmm. Yeah. I loved many of them.
All
It was
right.
like we were a strange little misfit community. We were doing this weird thing in the midst of this community that most people just drove right through and didn't want to even look at. Um, and to us, it was like this insane front row seat to this world that we were welcomed into and part of really for 25 years. Like the people I met every day were beautiful human beings who were in a large amount of pain, who had been vilified and demonized and just needed the basics. I mean, I used to say it's like being in a refugee camp, but there's no water, no food, no care. There's thousands of people that no one cares about and everyone's abandoned them. And here we are sitting in the middle of it. And then, of course, we started to see the overdoses as they came in giant waves, sort of in the mid 90s. And by 96, 97, we were at the at peak of our overdose crisis, the first one that hit North America because of this intense heroin that was very strong. Um, and that's when we started to sort of read up about what was going on in Europe and learning from other countries like Frankfurt and Germany, where they had overdose prevention centers or injection sites.
Can you tell us like a funny story from Hastings?
Well, everything's tinged with a little bit of trauma. I hate to say it, and I'm not trying to like trauma dump on anybody. But it was funny. It was a funny time. No, people were lovely. Lots of people were warm and friendly and fun. I mean, but there was just a lot of very extreme things that were sort of normal for us that I don't think would be normal for a lot of people. I remember my first week of being in the hotel, my first month, I don't know, there was this guy, Adrian, and he was psychotic and he had jumped out of a building and broken his arm. And I came across him in the lobby breastfeeding a pigeon that was dead, and he was completely psychotic. And because he was also somebody who used drugs, mental health system had no clue what to do with him. And that was also a gap, right? People thought in the mental health system, if you were a drug user, there was no medication that could help you with your mental health issues. So that was another huge gap. I mean, we're in situations all the time that were just would have been considered to a lot of people very odd. But for us, I don't know. I had people that I absolutely adored and are still in my life now that I communicate with on social media. I talk on the phone and I don't know, really lovely humans. And I lost a lot of people that I got to know and love.
That
And I
brings us that brings us to the sad story. I know that there's a lot of funny, I'm sure, and but there's
Mhm,
also a lot of sad stories.
mhm.
Is there a sad story that you reflect on from time to time?
Um, yeah, I mean, many. The sort of one of the women who I got to know who I loved very much, her name was Linda Gaines, and she was a schizophrenic woman who was about 6'2", and she was a drinker. Um, so her drug of choice was alcohol. She used to drink very cheap forms of alcohol, rice wine, over-the-counter rice wine that she would either steal or buy. It was very cheap. And she'd sit in the park and she'd drink a lot of rice wine. And then she would holler very loudly at the top of her lungs. And when she first moved into the hotel, people were terrified. It was like somebody had been attacked or raped or killed or something in front of them because she would scream in this sort of blood curdling, loud voice. And people would jump and it would be like, oh my God. And then after about 3 days of her living in the building, she'd walk through the lobby, same thing would happen. And everybody would be like, oh, it's just Linda, like we'd gotten so used to it, everyone knew that's what Linda does. And then, but the thing was, she was just this giant, lovely, I don't know how to describe her other than that she was just a very kind, very gentle, very caring woman who just happened to have this tick of screaming extremely loudly. And most of the time, if you actually tried to listen to what she was saying, she was screaming about how people had like made her feel like shit. They'd had called her big breasts, they made fun of her tits, like they were mean. And it was always this sort of, saying about these abusive things that had happened to her. And sure enough, there was all this abuse in her past. But Linda lived with us for, I don't know, 3, 4 years. She formed a lot of really good friendships with other people in the community. She was very kind and very generous. And sadly, I found her body dead in her room one night. And she had, I guess, her liver had given out and she died of cirrhosis. But what's sad, other than having found her and being just sad because I loved her, was that the ambulance attendants who came while we waited for the coroner were in the room with me while we waited with her body, and they were mocking her and making jokes about her. And I was so heartbroken because I really did just love Linda. And anyway, that's one of my sad stories. But, people just didn't see her. They didn't understand who she was. And I always felt like we had this incredible honor and privilege of getting to know people that the rest of the world just didn't see as worthy of getting to know. But, you know, joke was on them. We benefited.
Well, take this with a grain of salt. I'm reading a book about a hypnotist who spent 30 years hypnotizing people and got them to a point into super consciousness, which is the overlap between subconscious and conscious. And that's
Mhm.
where you relive you can talk about all your past lives and also the space between lives, like after death and before you're incarnated again. And so there's so much beauty and awe and incredible stories from the other side. So all these folks who overdosed and
Yeah.
there is no blame on the other side according to
Yeah.
these
Oh, I
stories.
like that.
and there's nothing but continual soul growth and education. It's almost like a
Yeah,
formal education system as a bright light of soul. It's a wild book. So she's probably in her
yeah,
cohort, with the friends
totally.
and the ones that she loved for, centuries and centuries, and just
Yeah.
relearning how to, be more resilient the next time she incarnates. Um, and
I
and
used to feel like I
yeah.
could see people around all the time after they died. It was like it was, I used to say it was like a chorus of these voices in my head all the time. I'd walk down the street and I'd hear, Freddie would be telling me something, or I'd think I'd see Linda, or like there was so much loss. There were so many people that died, um, so much grief. But those people become part of who you are. They become part of your DNA, and their lives and their stories matter. Um, because
Do you dream about them? Did you dream about
I
them?
did. I did. I used to dream a lot about people. I remember this guy, Russ, who, again, I don't know what it was about Russ. I just loved him. And he had a super complicated sort of diagnosis and listened to, heard voices, and was a cutter. So he would take glass, he would break windows, he would smash stuff and cut his wrists and cut his arms. And had all these scars up both arms. And it was because the voices would tell him to, and they were generally telling him to because they would tell him that he was worthless and unworthy and needed to hurt himself to punish himself for his lack of worth and value. And after, I don't know, getting to know Russ and spending a lot of time talking to him, I used to say to him, what if you don't cut? What if you just tell those voices that they're lying to you and that's not right, but they're saying that it's not true, that you are worthy and that you don't deserve to be in pain and that cutting yourself is hurting you and that you're valuable and that your life matters. And eventually, I don't remember how long after we got to know him and work with Russ, he stopped cutting. And then he would come down and he'd tell me, Liz, I heard the voices last night, and instead I heard you telling them to go away. So I started telling them to go away and to stop cutting me. And so I was like amazed that it had worked. And he stopped cutting, like he really did. And he carried on with his life. He continued to use substances, but, eventually, sadly, died of AIDS. And he had a very, very sad death because, there was just not a lot of resources for people who had AIDS, and especially who were drug users who had AIDS. And this is in the early 90s. So I drove him around for hours in my car trying to find a place where I could get him care. Eventually, I found this wonderful Catholic institution where they were providing hospice care to people who were dying. And he did have a very nice death in the end. But after he died, I had dreams about him for a long time, loads of dreams about him hanging out with me in my house, dreams about marrying him, dreams about, I don't know what it was, but they were intimate dreams. They were dreams like I couldn't figure out what to do with the amount of love that I felt towards him that I didn't really have any place to put, and it didn't make sense. And his mom came to visit and stayed with us in our house for a while, and she gave me a ring that he had bought for her, but I still have. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Based on the book that I'm reading, it is quite feasible that you and him have a bond that has lasted for centuries, maybe thousands of years.
Hmm.
And it is possible you were married with him at some point, or will be married with him in the next life, or something
Don't
like
tell
that.
Mark. I don't like that.
Mark will be your, I don't know, your
Child.
dog, your child. Yeah, you can be your child.
Um,
Uh, or a brother or a sister. He could be a
or
sister. He could be
father. If
father. Yeah.
no, let's not do that.
Um. All right. Let's talk about Gabor Mate a little bit.
Sure.
Um. Now everyone knows Gabor Mate, famous trauma expert international. How did he come to work for you?
Well, it wasn't like doctors were beating down the bushes to come and provide medical care in a SRO hotel in the middle of Hastings Street, where there was sex workers, there was alcoholics, there were drug users, there was folks with mental health issues, there was people with long histories of criminal involvement. This was not like a high profile prestige job. But the beautiful thing was another doctor, a very nice man named Jim Thorstensen, who worked at a local clinic, used to come and visit, and I'd get him to come and see certain people to deliver care. And he was so good at sitting on people's beds and so kind. And eventually he was like, Liz, you guys really need medical sessions. You need a doctor who's here like at least 2 days a week regularly, who gets to know people, builds relationships, because he understood the value of that relational piece of the work, and building trust went a long way to be able to actually get people primary care and mental health care. So he gave me the sessions. He found them through an institution that he worked for. And then I was able to advertise and hire a doctor to come to fill those sessions, like to pay for those hours. And I had no idea how to find a doctor that would be willing to do that. But I had read articles that Gabor had written in the newspaper, in the Globe Mail, and I liked his views and thought, he seems sort of progressive and radical, and maybe he would be interested in doing this kind of work. So I just called him and I said, would you be interested at all? I've got these sessions and I'm looking for a doctor that might be willing to come down and take a chance. And, I said, like, we're this weird little misfit project full of weirdos and sort of derelicts, but we're building a community and we have this lovely little space and we would love to get your help. And so he did, and he came, and yeah, I will be eternally grateful for the fact that he did. He was our doctor for 11 years. He had his office in one of the bedrooms in the old Portland Hotel down the end of the hallway for the first 6 years, I think, until we relocated into a building where we actually built a little medical clinic in our upgraded building that we occupied in 2000. But from there he started until we moved into the new building. He was working at a really shitty little SRO hotel room as his office with a little medical exam table. Yeah. So, and he was willing to see anybody, and he got to know a lot of people, and he was very open-minded. So it was important that we had him. He helped us tremendously establish legitimacy in terms of the approach we were taking within the medical professions. And, yeah, he was good.
All right. Did the publication of his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, based on his work experiences there, did it do any good for your organization?
Well, I mean, I never really saw any of our communication as being about our organization. I've always seen this as sort of a mission, really, about treating people better in the way we carve out systems and do this work. So I think his book has done a tremendous amount of good to reframe and use the stories that he gathered from working with us for those 11 years, including at Insite, to force people to question traditional approaches to dealing with people that we've failed for so many years. And I'm enormously grateful that he had that skill to write and tell the stories in a way that resonated with people. And it certainly has resonated with people. And his work on trauma really all grew out of that experience, because, I mean, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to realize how much trauma the people we were working with had gone through. I think at one point I tried to make the case to a funder that what we're looking at really is the face of trauma. And so we did a questionnaire in one of our buildings, just one of our hotels. We ran many of buildings. We had thousands of people that we worked with every day. And I asked, we conducted a survey. It was called I forget, Major Trauma Indicator Scale or something. And so it asked questions like, have you been in a fire, flood? Have you been raped? Have you been in, major trauma scale? And every single person in the building had experienced something on the major life trauma scale. So when you ask about the downtown Eastside as a community around Hastings Street and why people were there, I used to say all the time, it was the place in Canada where people who fell out of our social safety net ended up, because there was cheap housing, basically.
What were some other big positions you hired for the population there, besides a physician? And were there any other big, much needed?
Well, we had some nurses. That was it really, a couple of doctors, some nurses. We
You
didn't
had a
have,
couple of doctors.
We did end up with another doctor,
Okay.
Christy. Yep, she's still there as far as I know. And yep, and there was other doctors that worked part-time while they maintained their practice. The thing about Gabor is he sold his private practice that he owned, his general practice where he was a family doctor, and came and joined us full time. So that was kind of a big commitment that he made. So he was really full time with us. There were other doctors that we worked with who were employed through the health department that we had part time on different sessions at different programs at different times because we expanded out into a plethora of services beyond just the first hotel that we started to try and fill gaps and holes in the neighborhood, including things like a dental clinic and a bank, and we had a soccer team. We had a crazy
Excuse
array.
me, you had a soccer team for folks to
Yeah,
were with
it
these
was one of the
active users around the team?
yeah, homeless street soccer it was called. And we actually we flew the team to Paris. They played in the World Cup for Canada, and we also flew them to Rio. So
Wait a minute. Hold
they
on a
went to
minute.
two different World Cup games. It was amazing.
Wait, they went to a World Cup game for like the top athletes?
Well, in the homeless league, yeah.
Oh,
And you know, it was
so
kind of
there's a homeless league. There's an
there's a
international homeless league.
it's an international homeless street soccer league.
Tell
Yeah.
me about that. Like, how did that come about?
Well, we just had some staff that liked soccer, and they decided to take some people to go play it.
Oh, so
And
you guys started it.
no, the league had existed. Then we found people that were in that league, and then they invited our team to play games with the league, and our then our team and our players ended up basically being the vast majority of players on the national homeless team because there weren't really that many teams in Canada. And so our team ended up representing Canada. They wore the Canada colors. They flew to the World Cup for the homeless World Cup. Now I think out of the 50 whatever teams, 49 teams, they placed 49th the first time they played. But what I love is that our team, probably amongst one of the more disheveled teams of all of the international teams that showed up, because some of the countries really took it seriously and wanted to win. We just we just wanted our players to go and have the experience, which they did, and they had an incredible time. But they won one of the games. The team that they were watching playing had lost their shoes. They had no shoes. Something had happened in the luggage that in the flight they'd lost their luggage and they'd lost their shoes. So our team took off all their shoes and gave them all their shoes so they could play the game. And they just had that kind of spirit. They were really great. They had a great time, life changing for many of them.
Their shoes, they didn't give them away, right? They expected them returned.
Yeah, I think they did. Yeah.
All right. All right. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Why did government funding cease for your important work? I was watching a video called Invisible People on YouTube. It's like they have like over 1 million subscribers, and they spotlight homelessness issues. And he was interviewing a man who was doing similar work to what you were doing in Hastings. He was doing it in Washington State, and maybe you know this man. I forgot his name, but he said. The right wing political people, they try to they're not there's not a lot of opposition to harm reduction and but from the opposite but the opposition that there is extremely vocal and pretty powerful.
Mm,
And he said the narrative they circulate is that, well, homelessness is worse than ever. Obviously, these programs aren't working, right? And so that's a twisted narrative because homelessness has a lot of reasons for why homelessness is increasing, and it has nothing to do with the effectiveness of their programming or your programming. The
yeah.
affordability issue is major. So but and that's one of the narratives, and the general public will be is not the brightest egg, and so will nod their heads. A number of them will. These narratives work. They're deliberate. factually inaccurate, but they're catchy, they make sense. And another argument he had against harm reduction is to look at all the street violence and the acting out and the behavioral issues of people who are addicted or severely mentally ill, making the news and et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, harm reduction is not working because these acts keep happening and so forth. Yeah. But why did you lose your funding? Were these types of narratives circulating in Canada as well?
Yes, and I mean certainly the idea that we can take this, you know, social experiment of not incarcerating everybody who's a drug user, or not punishing everybody who's a drug user, and say, let's try something different where we make space available, housing, give people support, try and focus on their primary care, try and address them as human beings, and make space, human space for care, um, is intrinsically threatening to systems that exist on the backs of care being shrunken into what is often, a series of policies and protocols and rules that are ultimately dependent on people conforming to those systems and those rules and those behaviors. And there's always people that don't, because they can't fit into those boxes, because that's how we are. And so it's like the education system. There's always going to be people that are squished out at the end who just can't fit. And what do we do with them in our communities? We allow them to die and we blame them. And certainly that was what was happening in our community. And I think, critiquing that system by doing things differently produced sort of like this major spotlight on the challenges and problems that we had been creating for many years. And so while we were able to solve some of the problems, life expectancy, for instance, in our community went up by 10 years during the time we were in that community, which was pretty shocking. And partly, I believe, because there was this very concerted shift on getting housing and healthcare to people that had previously been completely abandoned. And we were able to start diagnosing chronic conditions and treating them rather than just letting people die of emergency issues like, overdoses or car crashes. So there was a sort of a long-term impact on what was happening. But it was very uniquely a culture of care. The organization that Mark and I ran, it was very committed to human spaces and running things in a human way, and not for the sake of either the organization or the funder. We existed really to try and meet the needs of the people in our community, and that's never super popular. And there is an agenda of control that exists, and a sort of a stepping into line. And they saw us, I think, to a huge extent as being, I don't know, alternative to what the mainstream approaches were meant to be and should be, and therefore not responsible in the sense that we weren't really responsible to them. We were very responsible to the community and to the people that we housed and supported, and like a friend of mine said after we left, Liz, the miracle wasn't that you guys were taken out. The miracle was that you lasted 23 years. I think that's true. I think the fact that we were able to provide really decent human care in a human, person-centered way, in a community, for a long time, that felt like a community, felt like a family, that the staff were, supported, that we felt like a team, that we were doing it together. It was an amazing time, and it was a unique space
Is
that went.
is Hastings up for gentrification?
Oh, well, a huge factor. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that point. A huge factor in our being sort of turfed out was also that as long as our services and our voice and advocacy existed, which had over the years become relatively powerful and hard to ignore, blocked developers from buying up the land and sort of plowing down what was seen as the last remnant of very valuable real estate in downtown Vancouver. So I was told that to my face, actually, by a developer who, according to them, they had been brought into the premier's office after we were gone. And they had said, well, we've got rid of them now. There's room for lots of expansion, development, and opportunity that didn't exist before. So, yeah, very much.
Ah, yeah. Capitalism trumps
Mm.
human lives. Um, all right. All right, so folks find themselves children born into a world of trauma and suffering and a cycle of addiction. So they really the odds of them not becoming addicted are very small. And then once they do become addicted, then this whole destructive cycle of pain and suffering, and ultimately leading to an early death. Um, is is this a nearly hopeless scenario? Are there any is there an effective way to help prevent addiction other than obviously reducing harm to children?
Well, that would be the ultimate prevention, would be to live in a world with no trauma, but that's not likely to happen. And trauma is kind of life. And people's vulnerabilities and sensitivities and receptivities to various drugs and coping mechanisms is all over the map. So it isn't really like there's one formula that's going to work for everyone. Some people are much more at risk of being inclined to use certain substances than others. And is it hopeless? No, I don't think so. I think there's things that we can do to show care and love and compassion that can improve people's lives significantly. And over the years that I was in the downtown side, and even now in my job, that I work in Connecticut with drug users and people that are struggling often with homelessness and addiction, like we find people and we connect them and to resources, we provide them with a different message, which is your life matters, you have meaning, you have value. You don't, just because you're somebody who's been told that repeatedly doesn't mean that's true. Um, and we can get people volunteer activities, or we can involve them in community events. We can check in with them and make sure they haven't overdosed recently. We can argue to provide them with all the things they need to prevent them from dying, keep them alive, get them access to healthcare. And
Can you?
certainly
Yeah.
some people do stop. And I mean, the rate of recovery, no matter what you do, is roughly the same. And there's always a degree of people for whom addiction ends. And that's always an incredible story when people find the strength and the fortitude, or the just decide that it's not for them anymore, it's not working anymore, something else becomes more important. And I think there's things we can do to help expedite that, in the sense of giving people a feeling that their life matters and has value.
All these things you mentioned, all the activities and the service to others and the community aspects, um, there was an experiment, a story, a scientific experiment with mice that showed how mice overcame addiction to narcotics. Can you share that story with us?
Are you talking about Rat Park?
Yes.
Yes. So Professor Dr. Bruce Alexander, who studied the psychology of addiction for his entire career, was a pretty prominent professor at Simon Fraser University in the 70s, did a study looking at what happened when the previous studies on addiction had been putting rats in cages with a lever and a bottle laced with drug water. Um, and rats would push on the lever, drink the water, overdose, and die. So the theory was compulsive behavior caused by the drugs equals death. He was like, what if we put the rats in a bigger cage where there isn't just the lever with the water? What if they have other little rats to play with? So he built this thing, he called it Rat Park. So he had rats, they could have sex, there was toys, there was food, there was lots of things they could do other than just press this one lever and drink this bottle of water. And no rats died in Rat Park of an overdose. And in fact, most didn't even bother drinking the water. So the theory being, of course, we are creating conditions in an environment in which we're not giving people the choice. We're giving them this one little lever. You know, it's the only way out for a lot of people. And that's why I'm a huge advocate of thinking about expanding the alternatives that are available to us that are highly underutilized when we're considering what addiction treatment consists of. To me, all of these interventions are addiction treatment, giving people a feeling of value, worth, whether it's employment or nurture or social groups or whatever. Like there's a million things we can do and try that we have not done because we've thought it was as simple as trying to remove the drug from that person. And it's not.
Right. And that's, I mean, forced treatment is to force people into a drug-free situation. But it's in everyone's psychology to resist force anything. People want to be in charge of their own lives. They want to exercise their own free will. But for some reason, the side of politics, I can't even believe that they believe force is the answer. It's obviously got something to do more with economics, right?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's quite understandable because you feel powerless and you want to do something. And when people feel powerless, it's not necessarily all motivated by a lack of care. I know a lot of people who think taking people off the street and forcing them into treatment would fix the problem. And they're not horrible people. They just feel powerless. I don't believe the research evidence indicates that that works. I've not seen any evidence that it does. Over the long term, people tend to relapse under those conditions because change has to happen when you want and are ready for that to happen. We know that from so many other things. It's no different with drugs.
So the idea is to just create an environment that is attractive and has safer uh, that allows for that encourages choice. These are opportunities to engage. These are opportunities to find joy in other things. These are opportunities to get your natural endorphins and brain chemicals triggered uh, as alternatives to, the drug-induced dopamine hits and that sort of thing.
Well, and I think also
Um,
just to
mhm.
establish a sense of self beyond this identity as somebody who's an addict, um, which a lot of people are stuck in and not given any opportunities to be a human. And and lots of people, when they stop using, just stop. They don't even go through treatment. I forget what the percentage is of people that recover from their addiction without ever going into treatment. Obviously, treatment works for some people, um, very successfully for people. I mean, I send people to treatment all the time. They go in, out, they go back, they come back. It's a cycle. Sometimes people need to go 5, 10, 15, 20 times if it's ever going to work for them. Some people, they use it like a break. It's a break from the street, from the hustle. Um, and I never deny people that opportunity. If that's part of what they want and need, then great.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you don't believe treatment could work, but it
No, of
has
course
to,
not.
it has to be a choice. It has to be,
That's right.
yeah. Um, on your burial plot, what do you want the tombstone to say?
Hmm. She tried to be present for people. Yeah.
Any pictures, any cartoons, anything on
Maybe one of Mark.
Oh, you and Mark are pretty tight, huh? You've been through a
No, I
lot,
was thinking, yeah, we have. We've been through a lot. Yeah.
but you fought big government together. All right. Well, that concludes our interview. Any parting words? Any closing thoughts?
No, I thank you very much for having me. It's very kind of you to be interested. It's an important conversation, matters to me.